I originally stumbled upon this idea when researching more about my Michael Afton is a robot crying child theory, but this has nothing to do with that, I'm just providing context. The main piece of evidence I was looking for was that Cassidy would not share a vessel, so if Cassidy was possessing Golden Freddy, the amount of anger and agony that Cassidy has would not allow for another soul to possess the suit alongside her, no matter who it was, even if it was her killer's son, especially not her killer's son. So it's just Cassidy possessing Golden Freddy, I hear you asking? Because this would just be circumstantial and based on your opinion of how you see the character of Cassidy. You could see her as being more than willing to share the suit with William's son since they both suffered the same wickedness, right? Yes, and that is entirely true, except I have some ideas that would present an entirely different solution to this problem. Allow me to explain. Fazbear Frights has given us hints as to how the game world operates over the last year or so. So far, with 9 books in the series being released, with the 10th coming out on my birthday this year and an 11th shortly after. However, there is one book that I'd like to call attention to, and I'm sure you can all tell which one it's gonna be. In room 1280 of Heracles Hospital, something evil is keeping a man alive. A man with gruesome burns all over his body and an iron will to live. The man in room 1280 is the 3rd story in the 5th Fazbear Frights book Bunny Call, the only Fazbear Frights book that I currently own, for good reason. I have the 10th pre-ordered though, don't worry. The story, written by Andrea Wagner, revolves around a man with, as the book's summary described, horrific burns all over his body. His organs are exposed, his face is missing, he has burn marks all over his body, and this man was taken off life support years prior to the story, yet somehow is still alive. The story ends with this horrifically damaged man being taken to a Fazbear Entertainment distribution center where he promptly explodes. This story is obviously meant to represent or very well be William Afton, who did end up escaping the FNAF 6 fire but was horrifically damaged because of it. The story was meant to show us that William had a soul possessing him, the soul of a young boy with curly black hair, rosy cheeks, and an alligator mask. The mask being in reference to the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 2. This explained how William always came back, how he survived the spring locking, the FNAF 3 fire, the FNAF 6 fire, and how he possessed a hard drive to be scanned in FNAF VR. He was taken to the warehouse before his death. But one thing always really bothered me about this story. Who is that kid? From what I understand in the epilogue, the boy then becomes a second soul inside of the Stitch Wraith, and that's what made everyone think that Golden Freddy had 2 souls, but I don't think that's what the story was trying to tell us. There's always been some form of confusion around the one you should not have killed, the one who keeps torturing William in Ultimate Custom Night. We all thought that it was Cassidy, who we assumed to be Golden Freddy, who was the one doing it, that she had trapped William in purgatory and was making him relive the horrors that he caused over all those years. But that, with the release of this book, was disproven, since William wasn't in purgatory or hell, but rather his own mind, stuck in the hospital either on life support or just being kept alive by this spirit, meaning that this kid would have to be the main antagonist of that game, the one that we see shaking at the end if we manage to beat 50-20 mode. This presents 2 different outcomes, neither of which are what we first expected though. It's weird, but I'm gonna go over them, don't worry. First, the simple answer. The kid from the Fazbear Frights books was just a deviation meant to show us that William was possessed by someone, showing us how he was kept alive, meaning that someone in the games would most likely be Cassidy, and the one you should not have killed was not Golden Freddy. Cassidy in this case would not be able to be Golden Freddy, since while multiple souls can possess one thing in FNAF canon, we have not seen evidence that one soul can possess multiple things. In fact, that has been disproven time and time again in the series, with the puppet having to give life to the animatronics after they've had a soul, or I guess agony, inside of them. This would mean that Golden Freddy was either possessed by another soul, or that everything having to do with Golden Freddy is an illusion. The other outcome would be that this kid from the books, the boy with the alligator mask, is Crying Child. That William's son, after being sent to the hospital and put in a coma by Fredbear, went on to possess his father and keep him alive after learning of his misdeeds. This is just as likely a scenario for me, if not even more likely, since it explains a lot of what we hear and see from characters in Ultimate Custom Night, such as Nightmare Fredbear, whose appearance should only be known to the Crying Child, but it presents itself in William's nightmare, as well as multiple lines such as "We know who our friends are," and you are not one of them, which is in reference to when the crying child dies at the end of FNAF 4, when psychic friend Fredbear says, "We are still your friends. Do you still believe that?" But remember that those Fredbear plushies are actually cameras created by William to watch his son, meaning that this line, if it was coming from Fredbear, would really be coming from William, as would the line "I will put you back together," which is also referenced in Ultimate Custom Night, when Nightmare Fredbear says, "I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed." How would Cassidy know about this line, about the "I will put you back together," about the appearance of any of the Nightmare animatronics for that matter, unless she had seen them herself? If this was Crying Child, it would make a whole heck of a lot of sense, especially because of that line, "I am remade, but not by you." It sounds sassy, like I was remade, but you didn't do it like you said you would. Like if your friend falls through on a promise, so then you say like, "Oh, I went bowling, but not with you." I have a friend who does that a lot. He's not even really a friend anymore, just because he is not really a good person. He's not watching, so it's fine. This also explains Nightmare's line of "the shadow fears me," which I originally thought was meant to be about William fearing death, since the purple of the purple guy was meant to represent a shadow. But the one thing that made me sure about this theory was the fact that the alligator mask boy from the man in room 1280 is described as a shadow. If this is the crying child who was being referenced as a shadow, it would explain this line. Nightmare is the final antagonist of FNAF 4, the one that crying child fears the most, the representation of death, of William's wickedness. The crying child has to be the one who possesses William. I mean, it makes sense. William was there when crying child died. The Golden Freddy suit wasn't, but William was. When crying child died in the hospital, we know that from his lines going through psychic friend Fredbear, he was there with his son. As for why Golden Freddy is moving at the end of the game though, that could simply be a visual way of showing us that William would be back in the next game, by having one of his victims convulsing. Or it could be crying child showing William a version of the Fredbear plush. I think that this has to be the explanation, and if not, then Scott needs to fix his narrative structure, because not only does this make sense, it works in a story sense as well, and honestly fits so many things into place, and feels good in a narrative sense. In Intent Possession, the main idea of possession in the FNAF universe is that you're around the object you're possessing, whether it be an animatronic, a toy, or a person. My question is, how would Crying Child have been around Golden Freddy if he dies in a hospital, as we hear thanks to the flatline at the end of FNAF 4? Cause like, it's either he's possessing William or Golden Freddy. So assuming the Crying Child dies in the hospital, as we're led to believe, how would Golden Freddy be close enough to actually get possessed? While yes, agony reaches out further from the body than any other emotion, it doesn't reach out that far. Not from the hospital to the pizzeria where you got your head squashed. The closest thing that we know ends up getting possessed by something is his father, which makes the most sense if he dies in the hospital. While you could argue that he died in Fredbear's mouth, there wouldn't be a need for IV, flowers, and pills, along with a heart monitor if he was dead from the moment that the animatronic bit down. So we know he didn't die in Fredbear's mouth. And at 9 limitations, we also see limitations of possessions other than actually being within proximity of the animatronic or object you possess. With what we've learned about agony and possession in the FNAF universe, nobody can really possess multiple large things at once. Sure, you can possess multiple small objects, as we see in the end of The Man in Room 1280, I believe is the story where that happens, but nobody has been able to possess multiple large or big ticket items like animatronics or people at once. This leads me to the conclusion that Cassidy and Crying Child have to be possessing two different things. Cassidy cannot be possessing Golden Freddy and William, and neither can Crying Child. So Crying Child is either Golden Freddy or the one you should not have killed. But we know that Cassidy is Golden Freddy thanks to the Happiest Day minigame Easter egg from the survival logbook. On the page asking about your happiest day, we can see the puppet giving a cake to a young girl with black hair. This same girl can be seen described in the FNAF novels and is named Cassidy. This combined with the Happiest Day minigame revolving around setting Golden Freddy soul free indicates that Cassidy has been set free thanks to the good ending not showing the Golden Freddy head in the background. So, if she's Golden Freddy, Crying Child has to be possessing William. And at 8, Fredbear. One of the biggest points I see as to why Crying Child is Golden Freddy or part of Golden Freddy is because Fredbear gets turned into Golden Freddy. What? When was this mentioned? Because I don't recall this ever being a fact in the games, especially never confirmed. Like, it's just the theory that perhaps Golden Freddy was just Fredbear repurposed or something like that. However, if we're being honest, William would not have reused the animatronic that killed his son. Okay? He would have destroyed it. Plus, the shapes of Golden Freddy and Fredbear are way too different to actually have them be the same animatronic. Freddy's proportions are much smaller than Fredbear's because Fredbear is a spring-lock suit, so it would have to have enough room for a human and all the robot parts to be tucked away. Golden Freddy just doesn't have enough room for that, and it's a suit with no endoskeleton, so they cannot be the same animatronic. So Crying Child would either be Fredbear or the one you should not have killed, and Fredbear was nowhere near Crying Child when he dies in the hospital, unless they're just a really crappy hospital. And it's 7 Glamrock Freddy. This is definitely not the strongest point, but it's something that I felt like was worth mentioning anyway. The character of Glamrock Freddy in Security Breach is the first animatronic to help us not die in the series, and based on Funko statues, the animatronic's belly will open up and allow us to climb inside. This made many people compare Glamrock Freddy and Gregory to Crying Child and Foxy Bro. However, I don't think that this is actually a good example. I mean, I've done it myself, but I mean, let's be honest. Do Mike and his brother really have that good of a relationship? Do they seem like the kind of brothers to stick by each other's side like they're the Winchesters? Or do they look like they're the kind of brothers who would shove each other into animatronic mouths for a laugh, resulting in the brutal, albeit accidental, death of their younger sibling? Exactly. Instead, what if this hiding inside the animatronic thing is actually meant to be representing William in Crying Child? It could make sense, given that Crying Child would have thought his dad was trying to help him at first too, only to feel betrayed when he realized what was actually going on. And William is the only other character we know to have someone hiding inside them other than other animatronics. Just saying. And it's 6, Released. At this point, Cassidy's soul has been released following the events of the Happiest Day minigame. We can even see this be proven to us in the survival logbook, which revealed Cassidy's name, since like I said, on the page talking about your happiest day, we see the puppet giving cake to a little girl who was drawn exactly how Cassidy is described in the book series. And the FNAF 3 endings also support this, since in the bad ending we can see the light on in Golden Freddy's head, you know, the one light that splashes to both eyes, and in the good ending that light isn't on anymore. So while some people think that she's not at rest due to her head not being there, we couldn't see her head even if the light was on. Like, we could only see it from the inside. So it being there, just in pitch black, is totally plausible and honestly expected. That's just how light works, and it's stupid to ignore the basic laws of the universe. Sure, we can have possessed robots, okay, that's fine, but nothing about that is going to change how light works. Okay, that's too much, even for Five Nights at Freddy's. And they should really fix those damn doors though. Halfway through into number 5, Andrew. The one you should not have killed ends up making an appearance in the Fazbear Frights books. Well, a version of the character does, since this one is named Andrew and is wearing an alligator mask. However, this version has way more in common with Crying Child than they do with Cassidy. Firstly, they're both male characters with dark hair. Secondly, Andrew at one point appears as a shadow as described in the story, and Nightmare in Ultimate Custom Night says, quote, "The shadow fears me," which could be what this moment in the book was referencing, since Ultimate Custom Night takes place during the events of the Man in Room 1280, only allowing William to wake up when he manages to survive. Either way, Andrew has more in common with Crying Child, which makes sense given that these books are meant to clear things up from the games so that we can move ahead with the lore. So the introduction of Andrew was clearly meant to demonstrate that Crying Child is the one you should not have killed. And at 4, He. When looking at Ultimate Custom Night, we find a lot of information about the one you should not have killed, since, you know, they were introduced. Lines that also refer to the one you should not have killed call him a he, which some wrote off as confusion because of the animatronic Cassidy inhabits, but there is no way that they would call a spirit by their animatronic gender identity, okay? They'd be a spirit, not an animatronic. This has always bothered me. Because if Cassidy was possessing both William and Golden Freddy, she would still want to be referred to as Cassidy when not inside Golden Freddy, especially if Cassidy is really as vengeful as we thought, since, you know, being called by the thing that you get stuffed into after being brutally murdered probably isn't gonna make a spirit too happy. Getting close to the end in number 3, Nightmare Animatronics. The appearance of the Nightmare Animatronics as well in Ultimate Custom Night is another indicator that the one you should not have killed is Crying Child. Since FNAF 4 ends with Crying Child dying, who else would know about the Nightmare Animatronics that are literally nightmares? Nobody, especially not Cassidy. If Cassidy is the one you should not have killed, how would she have known what the nightmare animatronics look like to have them torture William in Ultimate Custom Night? She just wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't make sense. The presence of the nightmare animatronics in Ultimate Custom Night and after means that the one you should not have killed had to know what they look like. And since Crying Child saw them in a nightmare while in a coma and died after he saw them there is no possible way anyone else could know what they look like. They have a stomach mouth, probably because Crying Child saw Elizabeth get gotten by a baby, which would realistically make him fear the animatronics and the animatronic stomachs in case they also have a surprise claw that will eat you. It's just, it's the only thing that makes sense. And if you think that FNAF 4 isn't a dream, click up in the top right corner because we have a whole video about that. And ultimately, in at number 2, literary symmetry. Just like how Chuck had Jessica die in the same way as Mary Winchester in Supernatural, it seems that Scott Cawthon is taking that same idea and applying it to Five Nights at Freddy's. Also, can you tell I've been watching a lot of Supernatural? Since if we think about it, Crying Child and William are both put in the same position in their respective games. FNAF 4 has Crying Child lying in a coma, dying in the hospital, and Ultimate Custom Night has William laying in a coma, dying in the hospital, but also not dying because he's being possessed. Either way, they're both dealing with roughly the same thing, and I think that's why we got the Man in Room 1280, since Scott wanted to clarify that William wasn't in hell, but rather in a coma much like his son. It's great storytelling and it's not something that you can say Scott wouldn't do. In fact, Scott probably thought about this as soon as FNAF 4 was released, and thought that that's how William would have to end as well. Death like your son, but make it a little spicy, you know? That's basically what Scott did, and it only serves as more evidence. There's no way it's a coincidence. Not in FNAF. In a fan base that is literally comparing hexadecimal color codes. There's no way that's a coincidence. Finally, in at number 1, Ultimate Custom Night voice lines. Finally, we come to one of the biggest pieces of evidence I feel proves that Crying Child is the one you should not have killed. So it's pretty well established at this point that in Ultimate Custom Night, the death lines are just the animatronics repeating what the one you should not have killed says, as we can see with the mediocre melodies, because we can hear the one you should not have killed behind them. And the voice casting was supposed to work as a young boy or a young girl. However, a majority of these lines end up having something to do with Crying Child. This is even more pertinent since we don't know a lot about Cassidy, so these being personalized is a very important detail. And then we have the addition of lines like, I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed, and I have always been hiding in your shadow, and most importantly, let me put you back together and take you apart all over again. All of these are references to the Crying Child. I am remade references William's promise to put his son back together as his child, and as his child, Crying Child would be in William's shadow to hide, since his father would make him feel protected, at least at first. And I don't think that we need an explanation for let me put you back together, which I guess if you want one, is also a reference to that famous FNAF 4 line. But the thing is, how would anyone else know these things? Cassidy would have no way of knowing, and why would they talk about it if they did? Clearly, the one saying these lines has a bone to pick about this, and that person is Crying Child. While I may have had prior bias to the idea that Crying Child is the vengeful spirit, aka the one you should not have killed, I really do want to get to the bottom of this, genuinely. So, when researching for Cassidy, I was keeping an open mind and using every source that I could. Multiple things stuck out to me as being commonly referred to as evidence for Cassidy. The final scene of Ultimate Custom Night where Golden Freddy is twitching after you beat 50-20 mode. The survival logbook, which seemingly contains conversations between Crying Child and Cassidy. The voice lines you can hear behind the mediocre melodies sound like a girl, like the ones that play slightly after the main mediocre melodies ones. And William actually killed Cassidy directly, as far as we can tell, whereas Michael put Crying Child in Fredbear's mouth. And these are some good points, and not something to discount. These are also the points that made me believe that Cassidy was the one you should not have killed originally as well. There's also the point that when the animatronics refer to the character as he, they're simply referring to the Golden Freddy animatronic, since Golden Freddy is a male character, as well as Cassidy's name containing the Cass prefix, which means curly-haired in Gaelic, and the character of Andrew, who represents the vengeful spirit in the Fazbear Fright story The Man in Room 1280, has curly black hair. There's also the 2-eye theory from FNAF 3. The 2-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending, there are 2 eyes lit up in the head and the back, which we assume to be Golden Freddy to show that there are two souls inside the animatronic. I do have rebuttals for Crying Child points as well, alright, so don't worry, but I feel like it's important to not only talk about the evidence, but also give countering points to it as well. These are mostly coming from my brain, but after over 350 FNAF videos on my own, I feel like I am more than qualified to discuss this. The Golden Freddy final scene in Ultimate Custom Night can easily be explained away if you do believe the two souls theory, since if it was Crying Child in the suit as well, this would make sense. It could also be due to the fact that he was put in a coma by the Fredbear animatronic, which is a golden bear like Golden Freddy. The he pronoun being used to describe the vengeful spirit is a really hit to the Cassidy theory as well, since why would they be describing the gender of an animatronic when they're talking about the kid that died? Especially when, thanks to the mediocre melodies, we know that these animatronics are just saying the things that they're made to say by the one you should not have killed, meaning the spirit is really the one using these pronouns, so why wouldn't they use their own and instead use the animatronics? The voice lines sound like a girl because, well, they're voiced by a girl. The casting call on voices.com was very general and said that the actress could lean towards either a male or a female. The survival logbook having two spirits doesn't really have anything to do with Cassidy being a vengeful spirit, and the Cass prefix, while yes meaning curly haired in Gaelic, seems to me like a bit of a stretch. The whole name of Cassidy is Irish in origin and means the clever one. The origin of this name is also 65% Irish and only 5% Gaelic, meaning if we want to go off meaning, we should be going with the majority, which would be the clever one, which really doesn't do anything to help this theory. And the 2-eye theory has been debunked by us in the past in its own video and also on my Instagram in a reel. However, I'll go over it here. In an interview with Dawko, Scott confirmed that while making FNAF 3, it was intended to be the finale, that there was no intended next game, meaning that at that point there were no other characters that could possess Golden Freddy. The lights being on in both eyes is simply because the light is bouncing off the inside of the head, and to show us that it actually is an animatronic head that was supposed to be Freddy, since if it was only one eye it could also kind of look like Bonnie. Or hell, if it's only one eye we would have thought that it was another Foxy. Now there is a lot more evidence for Crying Child in my opinion, okay? Whenever I asked others who thought that it was Cassidy why they thought it was Cassidy instead, they all ended up giving me the same points. That Cassidy was killed directly, the two souls theory, and the gender confusion of the animatronic. Typically, nothing additional was added, okay? I'm sorry, it's just how it went. So now let's go over some of the evidence I gathered for Crying Child's case. Cassidy was released in the Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3, hence why the original animatronics don't appear in FNAF 6 when Henry is trying to put everything involving Fazbear Entertainment to rest. If Cassidy is at rest as well, she cannot be possessing William. The spirit possessing William also, from what we've seen in the games, cannot be possessing both him and the Golden Freddy animatronic. If he can possess multiple things, then the two souls theory helps explain that as well, despite two souls and multiple possessions coming out of seemingly nowhere as far as the games are concerned. As I said, the casting call also said whoever got the part could lean towards a male or a female voice. And considering how Tabitha Scaines, the actress who got the part, is female, it would make sense for her to lean towards a female voice. It's also worth noting that most prepubescent male characters have female voice actors. Danny Phantom, Timmy Turner, Ash Ketchum, all these characters have female voice actors because they're young, so the same would be the case for Crying Child. The appearance of the Nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4 as well also seems to be impossible unless the one creating that situation, the Vengeful Spirit, had seen them before. And since FNAF 4 was a dream, as confirmed by Ultimate Custom Night in lines like "This is a nightmare you won't wake from," Crying Child is the only one to have seen these animatronics. Crying Child also dies in a hospital after suffering through the agony of his coma nightmare, which would give him the power to latch onto something nearby, which would have most likely been his father. There's also weaker evidence like the fact that the image used for the Vengeful Spirit is just a blown out image of Scott's son, which could be a parallel to William's son. Andrew from the Man in Room 1280 is also a male, and while yes, Michael put Crying Child's head into the robot, William was the one who made the robot and also made it powerful enough to crush a skull, whereas a normal animatronic would be unable to do so, which is what Michael assumed would happen. He didn't think that it was going to kill his brother. Something that MapHat also agrees with. if, like some commenters have said, they only care about what he says and not the actual evidence. And while there is more evidence for Crying Child, there are also some things that don't have clean answers. The same is true for Cassidy. Cassidy might not have been released in the Happiest Day minigame, despite it seemingly being the case. The Nightmare animatronics also do appear in FNAF VR, which could have been due to the scanning of the hard drive that created Glitchtrap, who had seen the nightmares at this point, but it doesn't explain the fact that Michael drew Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook, unless this is something that he drew beforehand and then showed to Crying Child, hence why they showed up in his dreams, but that involves assumptions that I'm just not comfortable making. Crying Child does die in a hospital. However, while we haven't really seen proof that you can possess something far away in the games, we also technically haven't seen proof that says you can't. In my personal opinion, the lack of evidence is in and of itself evidence against that, but I guess I can see why others wouldn't be so quick to accept that. The same idea with possessing multiple things. The whole image being of Scott's son thing is kind of weak, but considering that the FNAF 4 home was also decorated with images of his family, I'd actually like to think that this is more important than we realize. Because sure, using his own assets is cheaper than buying them, but this seems very deliberate. If the images in the FNAF 4 home were supposed to be of William and his family, and they were of Scott's family, and then Scott's son is used for something else, yeah. But people will hone in on how that is circumstantial. The biggest rebuttal for Crying Child, however, is that William didn't kill him, Michael did. And since Crying Child is William's son, he wouldn't want to torture his dad. And while this can be true, we have to remember that Crying Child is again also a child, who most likely saw his sister get scooped by Baby, who got scared when he saw his father putting a worker into the Fredbear suit, and one of Scott's hints from that live stream oh so long ago was what is seen in shadows is often misunderstood in the mind of a child. Even without seeing William give the superpower he needed to the animatronic in order to make it a killbot, Crying Child knows that William is making killbots. He knows that he made Baby, and he knows that William made Fredbear. So getting killed by the animatronic wouldn't necessarily be Michael's fault, it would be William's. Much like how Elizabeth's death was his fault as well. And being family doesn't mean that you can't dislike or even hate those people, okay? Being related to you doesn't automatically give people a free pass for doing horrific acts. If my father was a serial killer who killed my little sister, and then killed me using overpowered animatronics, you best believe I'm coming back with a vengeance. And also, just one final point in general, in that interview with Daco that is still available on Daco's channel, Scott said that FNAF 3 was intended to be the final game. This question is presented 21 minutes into the video if you want to actually look at the timecode, when asked about which ending of FNAF 3 is canon. However, Scott also refuses to answer that question, because he knows how passionate the community gets, and cites the argument over Mangle's gender as a reason why he won't answer it. He says that it's complicated. And to me, this sounds like it's because what people generally understand in this series would be countered by which ending is canon. The good ending would have released Cassidy's soul, which would in turn make it impossible for her to be the vengeful spirit, since that minigame was in fact not Crying Child, okay? He hadn't been introduced yet. And according to a recent community poll, which actually inspired this video, the generally accepted idea is that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit. So if he had countered that, everyone would have all been up in a tizzy, okay? This was also after Ultimate Custom Night had been released, so yeah.